Hi, and welcome to the Luminaries In and Out of Sect podcast, a show about the moon and how astrologers embody and relate to it. My name is SP Hall, and I'm your host. In today's episode on the Aquarius Moon as the Sect Light, I speak with astrolojohn. We talk about the placement of their moon in the tropical ninth whole sign house. But we also talk about being bi-zodiacal, that is, the benefit of using both tropical and sidereal zodiacs, and John's study of both Jyotish and Hellenistic astrology. Like the house system debate that has recently ensued again on Twitter, there's often conflict between those that use the tropical zodiac and those that use the sidereal zodiac. I hope this episode can show some ways in which they can be used together in constructive and informative rather than oppositional ways. In addition, I also wanted to mention that I recently launched a website for the podcast as well as my own services. If you enjoy this podcast, you can support this work by becoming a free or paid member or offering a one-time donation. I want to give a shout out to Diana Rose Harper for becoming my first paid member on the Manchego tier. Thank you so much for your support, Diana. In addition, I've started offering audio editing and transcription services, and will be working with the astrologer Ari Felix on editing their podcast, Mystery Loves Company. Check that out in the show notes or wherever you listen to podcasts, and visit my website for more information. But now for the wonderful conversation I had with John. I hope you enjoy it. Please be sure to check out the links to their website and socials below, as well as links to some of the resources that we touch on in our conversation. Astrolojohn, thank you so much for joining me today. It's a pleasure to meet you for the first time, and I'm really excited for our conversation. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to get into the topic at hand today. I'm doing good with these stations recently. It's feeling like things are moving and grooving in ways that they normally shouldn't be. And the amount of like slices that I've gotten on my hands as Mars retrogrades and stations through my first, because I work with a box cutter at my job, has been asinine. But other than that, it's good.
Yeah, it's just dawning on me that Mars has been retrograde in your ascendant sign for the last 5 million years, and
Yeah.
you're Gemini rising, so the Mercury retrograde is also.
Yeah.
So
and our ascendants are like almost perfectly opposite one another.
Yeah.
So yeah, the Mars station was like basically on my ascendant, like within a degree. So yeah, it's been a lot.
Yeah. How do you look at people with like opposite ascendants? Do you feel like it's can be adversarial, or do you feel like it can be opposites attract kind of thing?
No, I think I always have kind of the best personal relationships with people who have other mutable ascendants generally. Like I have a lot of, I think the way that we think and like the direction that our mind wanders is generally very similar in how we just like approach the world and approach problem solving and whatnot. So
Yeah.
I think it's generally pretty positive.
I love the mutable axes, and I think that a lot of, as a Sag rising, kind of Jupiter ruled rising, I will say that I think a lot of the constructiveness of the mutable axes is due to Mercurials being very mercurial and adaptive.
Yeah.
Like
Totally.
I think you guys are lifting a lot of weight in that relationship personally.
I think we make it look that way. I think we're just much more upfront about it, whereas the Jupiter people, despite Sag being, everyone's like Dionysus, partier, blah blah blah, but Sag can still be very very big picture and very like high in the sky, as opposed to Mercurials being more on the ground.
Yeah. And I think that we need the big picture, but we also need the details. So it's a
they're both
good
very
combination.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, do you want to start by just giving an introduction to yourself, your perspective or philosophy on astrology, and maybe some of your influences and teachers?
Totally. Hi, everybody. My name is John, or astrolojohn on the internet. I've been practicing Hellenistic astrology for 6 years. Yes, 6 years. And I started practicing Jyotish about 2 years ago. My philosophical perspective on astrology loaded question. I think that's still, I don't think I'm ever going to have like a definitive answer on that, because I think it is ever evolving in the ways that we like in in our paths and practices and studies. I think that philosophy can change every day, or grow every day rather. Generally on like the fate versus free will debate, I'm much more on like, I know I'm just gonna come out guns blazing. I'm much more on like the closer to the fate side than I am towards the free will side. That has definitely really been influenced by Jyotish. I was much more free willy before I started practicing Jyotish. I am someone who believes that you should, in order to do good astrology or like ethical astrology, you need to have a relationship with the planets. You can't just be like looking at a screen all day. You got to go outside. You got to feel it. We're going to talk about like the moon a lot. And that is always what I tell people is like the most important thing to do when you're starting astrology is just like go out and look at the moon and like feel her and connect with her. And you're going to feel crazy. I promise you're going to feel like crazy, cuckoo banana, but the energy is there. And so, yeah, I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one thing I want to say is I relate to the reluctance around nailing down a philosophy. I don't know if that's like a Gemini rising thing, but like I relate to that because I studied philosophy in college and people would be like, oh, who's your favorite philosopher? And I'm like, I didn't want to be like, that's a stupid question, but I sometimes felt that way. But like, it's like, oh, I am studying this so that I can learn how to think critically and think well, as far as we can, qualitate thinking. But philosophy is always a thing that is in flux and is changing. And, I feel like it's like, as long as we're growing as humans and learning new things, like our perspectives are changing. So I appreciate that kind of that distinction. So I guess like we can kind of get into how we know each other, which is spoiler alert, this is our first conversation.
Apart from like maybe 6 or 7 Twitter and Instagram messages. Yep. This is our first conversation.
Yeah. So I will say that shout out to Kira Taborn, because I learned about your podcast, Triplicity. Anybody who hasn't listened to Triplicity, go listen, because it's a great time. You three have a wonderful dynamic, and I love listening.
Thank you.
In particular, enjoyed the episode where you read Deja and Jared's Jyotish charts. I thought it was kind of mind blowing, but I learned about the podcast via like something she was doing for the 11th house. Learning that y'all kind of met there, I think.
Yes. Yeah, we were in like the first cohort of the 11th house.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, and then I guess we were all at NORWAC 2022 together, but I didn't.
You were there?
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, no, do not remember.
Yeah, do not remember seeing you there, but I listened to the Triplicity episode about it because I was like, oh, I went to NORWAC. I want to hear what these people had to say about NORWAC. And I thought that the weed circle at NORWAC 2022 saved my life was such a good t-shirt idea. And I posted that on Twitter, and I think that's how we kind of got connected for the first time. Yeah.
Yep. That was definitely, that was how we definitely got connected. Yep. It is. I think we actually are going to make them t-shirts. I think it would be so funny.
Amazing. I love that. So would be so glad to just have some kind of little hand in that. Is there anything that you want to add in terms of being both a kind of Hellenistic practitioner and a Jyotish practitioner, in terms of how those two schools of thought, I don't know if you can call them schools of thought, but those two traditions relate to each other?
Yeah, I want to coin the term bi-zodiacal. I think that's the term that I'm going to use from now on. I think that is a really good way to explain it. It's just understanding that there are certain techniques that are in each tradition that are specific to the tradition, and you should not mix and match. There are certain what's the word I want to use? Because like techniques and timing and those kinds of things, I keep in 2 separate boxes. I'm only going to do dasha from the sidereal Vedic chart, I only really still look at solar returns and those methods of timing for Daria, etc., from tropical charts. So I keep the technical aspects in two separate buckets,
Mm-hmm.
but the just I guess like the methods and the more like foundational level stuff, I
Mm-hmm.
tends to carry over between both because there's so much of my tropical Hellenistic astrology that was influenced by learning Jyotish,
Mm-hmm.
and I couldn't have picked up Jyotish as well and easily as I could have without my foundations in tropical. Like there
Mm-hmm.
were people in my Jyotish class last year that was their first astrology class ever,
Wow.
and I still think it is like probably the most difficult class I've ever taken, including all of my college courses and post college
Mm.
whatever. So I don't know how those people made it through that class. Like kudos to them. Because if I didn't have a sperm foundation in like people like didn't know the order of the zodiac.
Oh,
And
wow.
I was like, oh, like you fully completed this class. Like you must have done a shit ton of work. Like good job. I'm so
Right.
proud of you. Yeah.
You're learning the Chaldean order and Sanskrit at the same time.
Yeah. Literally though, it's like, oh, you have to learn all this the 12 house significations and like the lords of like I couldn't imagine doing all of that in
Right.
9 months.
So just to be clear, so in terms of foundations, it's like triplicity, modality, the house system,
Yeah, the
something about the
houses,
planets.
yeah, they don't use triplicity lords really, but like the idea of like triplicity and modality and
Mm.
etc. is present. But yeah, like they don't look at bounds, they don't look at triplicity lords, they don't look at decans. I mean, the decans are like their own divisional chart basically, but it's
Hmm.
not like the decan scheme that we look at. Um, but yeah, they influence and they um reaffirm each other just through
Yeah.
different lenses.
Yeah. And also, just to be clear, and I was really excited actually to have this conversation with you because I feel like there's so much sidereal tropical beef
Oh my
on
god, yeah.
social media, and like I'm a relatively new student to astrology, but it does strike me as one of those things that if you were outside of the astrological community looking in, you'd just be like, "This is all absurd. What are you guys doing?" And from my perspective, I'm like, okay, we're looking at symbolic systems of meaning,
Right.
so like, can we have some openness to each other? And I'm really excited. I was excited to talk to you about it because you do have this perspective, and correct me if I'm wrong, that these two systems, bi-zodiacal, as you say, like can exist next to each other and can
Yeah.
reinforce one another.
What really boggles my mind, especially when it's the siderealists coming for the tropical astrologers, is that like even in sidereal Vedic astrology, there are different ayanamshas that you can use.
Mm,
So like the placement of my moon nakshatra, because it is so close to the boundary of the next nakshatra, depending on the ayanamsha that you use, my moon will change
mm,
nakshatras,
mm.
which will change my timing, which will change my mental health. Like there's so much of my chart that changes just from my moon moving. Literally, it's like less than a degree forward in the zodiac.
Right. And can
And
you explain
so,
just really quickly what is
yeah,
that word that you used?
Ayanamsha. It is the like basically like the degree difference between zero Aries tropically and zero Aries sidereally.
Oh, okay.
And that so it's around 24 degrees right now. So when we have the tropical Aries ingress, the sun is about 6 Pisces-ish sidereally.
Okay.
And that number that the Ayanamsha is continuously increasing.
Right.
And so when people talk about like the age of Aquarius,
Hmm.
that is going to start when the Ayanamsha proceeds, so that when it's zero tropical Aries, it will be 29 sidereal Aquarius. So we will have
Oh,
more than a sign's length of difference, but that's not for another like 300 years.
right.
But that,
Okay.
yeah, but that number is continuously growing each second of time that moves forward.
Right. Because of the idea of procession, right?
Precession, yeah.
Yeah. Which we don't have to get into explaining that, but
I
it's
got
good,
a
I
C,
think,
I
for
got a C minus in astronomy. I don't really want
yeah, it's good for people
to.
to at least know that term. So if it's like if you want to look into that, what that
Yeah.
means and why sidereal is different from tropical, that's kind
Mm-hmm.
of the idea behind it.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you for explaining all that. Appreciate it.
Totally.
So yeah, in terms of the moon, so thinking back to your childhood,
Mm-hmm.
what was your relationship to the moon? Or what's one memory that comes to mind from that time in relation to the moon?
When I was a child, I am told that I like notoriously just like never slept. I would sleep for like maybe 3 hours a night, keep my parents up all the time, and still like that to this day. Like I sleep for like 5 hours a night on like a good night. Um, so I'm always like I've just always been consistently like up doing work, and like I'm in my most active when the sun is in like the fourth house transiting. So I like all the memories I have of like growing up just happened to be things I was doing at night, whether it was like going out with friends or like reading at night or like playing, like whatever I was doing. It was always like every conscious memory I have basically is that of nighttime. It's just always been the time that I feel the most comfortable and the most active.
Very interesting. And you have a nocturnal chart. The moon's your sect light. And I'm just like thinking about that because I really relate. And I also know that you love Pokemon.
I do love Pokemon.
I remember laying up at night. I also had a very hard time sleeping as a kid. And I would just like lay up at night, playing Pokemon.
Playing my DS. Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Yeah, that's so funny. DS. I played like OG original Game Boy, but this speaks to a little bit of the maybe our different Saturn signs for to put it a certain way. Cool. And so today, like what is your relationship with the moon today, and why do you think it's important to think about the moon when we're talking about astrology? And yeah, if you could talk a little bit about how the moon is viewed in Jyotish, because I think it's a little bit different than Hellenistic, I would really appreciate that.
Yeah. So my relationships, I think, to learning Jyotish, I think my relationship with the moon has changed. Yes, we have this idea of sect light in Hellenistic astrology, day chart versus night chart, but in Jyotish, it's like it's the moon. Like the moon is that girl.
She's everything.
She is everything, but like, yes, she actually is everything in Jyotish. You like do transits from your moon in the ascendant, your like nakshatras, like your entire how you see the world. There's just so much about the moon that is like the basis for Jyotish. And I think about how the moon and the sun and their dynamic was the original way that people kept time. Like before it was January 20th, we'd be like, oh, it's the 15th day of the waning moon. Like we're almost at the new moon. And so this idea of the moon being this like regular rhythmic like figure in the sky and something that people could just like physically see and be like, oh yes, it's bigger than it was yesterday. Like time has progressed. Like we are moving forward. I really think like it embodies everything about astrology. And we think my like Dorotheus, all their names I get mixed up, so I don't know whoever says what. I'm not the person to remember those things. But a lot of authors always talk about the moon as like materializing things and bringing things like to the earthly sphere, because it is the sphere that is closest to us. And so it is almost like that first layer of the like cosmic onion that we have to peel.
Right.
Like the moon is right there.
Right. Yeah, it's the only planet, quote unquote, that revolves around the earth, and everything, all of the, whether you want to think about it as I don't know what the word is, energy is the word that comes to mind. Effluence of the other planets. Effluence is kind of a gross word, let's be real. Of the other, I think that's a word that's used though, but that from the other planets has to filter through the moon before reaching the earth. So there's definitely something to be said about that. And I think that one of the things that you remind me of was I was watching an Astromedia talk last night by Austin Coppock. I think he did the keynote this past year. And he was talking about the importance of the moon in astrological magic, and really any kind of electional astrology. And one of the interesting things that you reminded me of was this idea of telling time, and the kind of the idea of the moon being the first timekeeper that we would have rather than the sun. Like we wouldn't really know when a year would happen, but we could know what a month would be because of how
a month.
Yeah. as I shit posted on Twitter.
But like you're right.
It's right. Yeah. Like we have a month because it's like around the lunar cycle.
Right.
Yeah. And the interesting thing that he was talking about was like the first kind of astrology that people would likely do would be looking at the moon cycle in relation to the fixed stars. and what happened around that time. Like, what were the correlations of the moon conjoining the fixed stars in the sky, which he related to this idea of nakshatras. And I think that that's an interesting thing about Jyotish, is that before they had the zodiac, and correct me if I'm wrong because my history is not up and up on Jyotish, but they already had a kind of
the nakshatra preceded the 12 sign zodiac, or the Rashi is what it's called in Jyotish. Yeah.
So can you just give a brief description of like what the nakshatras are?
Yeah. There's 27 nakshatras because it takes the moon 27 and like a third days to make an orbit around, like a 360-degree orbit around the zodiac. So basically the moon spends 1 day-ish, depending on speed, in each of these nakshatras. And the myth, something along the lines of the moon having to spend 1 day with each of his 27 wives. So in Jyotish, the grahas, or the planets, are all seen as men, even though the moon is a feminine planet. It, like Chandra, is still a man. And the nakshatras are all the female personifications of the wives of the moon that he spends each day with. And then to account for that extra third of the day, there is a nakshatra. It's the only boy nakshatra, Abhijit, that exists from 7 degrees of Capricorn to like 10.5 degrees of Capricorn.
Where has to be Capricorn. Complicated.
It's
Capricorn.
where my moon is. In fact, I am the 28th
in Jyotish. In
Jyotish,
sidereal, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah. If you were to include that one, then but that one is only included when you talk about like spiritual matters of spiritual. So matters of the physical, you just look at the 27.
Okay.
The nakshatra and its lord tell a lot about the natives, like mental health and their prana, their breath.
Cool. Yeah. And one thing I want to offer as a resource to people, and if you don't like this resource, definitely give me your opinion. But I did a reading with, my first astrology reading was with Erin Tech Shipley, and we were talking about Saturn, and she suggested I read The Greatness of Saturn, which talks a lot about, I mean, it's kind of like rooted in, I don't know how to say, like an Indian context. And talks about the planets within that context. And I don't know how kind of like authentic it is. So, which is where my reticence is coming in. But I did find it really helpful in my relationship with Saturn. And also I'm reminded of, there's a whole chapter on the moon where they talk about this myth and talk about something along the lines of the moon really, I think, loved one of the nakshatra, like one of the wives, and then,
Rohini.
Yeah, and then like was condemned to be consumed, like, and
he wanted to spend all of his time in Rohini, which is a nakshatra in Taurus, or sidereal Taurus. So that's why he's forced to move around, because or else the sun's like, no, I'm gonna get you.
Yeah.
Because I believe they're all the daughters of the sun.
Yeah, something along those lines. Daughters of somebody.
Yeah, there's some. Yeah, I think it's, and the sun is like, if you don't move, I'm gonna come get you for staying in one too long.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's why he's got to go.
Yeah. So I found that book to be a good resource for that. Do you have any additional like resources people can look into to learn more about nakshatras, or?
I mean, I think everyone should read Science of Light Volume 1.
Okay.
I think it's just a great base text for important Jyotish concepts, and there's like a dedicated section in that book to nakshatras, and it gives you a little like 1-page story about each of them. As far as like nakshatra specific texts, I have not found any that I personally like love.
Yeah. I think giving Science of Light as a resource to people is like a great, first sort of step. And just to be clear, your Jyotish teacher is Freedom Cole.
Freedom Cole, yes, who is Science of Light. That's his school. I am a student of his, and I think his work is phenomenal, which is why I'm continuing to be a student.
Wonderful. Yeah, and I just also want to say, if you go to his website, you can do, he has an introductory lesson to Science of Light that does like the whole first chapter, and so I feel like that's a really good resource for people who are like very new to astrology.
Absolutely.
Want to strengthen their foundation. Okay, so moving on to Aquarius. What does the sign of Aquarius mean to you?
Aquarius, my favorite water sign.
I love it. I say the same thing about Capricorn.
That is your favorite water sign, yeah.
Well, I at least am like, hey, Capricorn isn't just I don't experience Capricorn as a dry earth sign. Okay, like Capricorn, it's the sea goat. It's not just the goat.
Anyway. Well, and the interesting thing about Capricorn in Jyotish is that most of the zodiac is symbolized the same way. Capricorn is though symbolized by a crocodile.
Oh,
it is like a sea. It is like a sea monster. Mm-hmm. So yeah, there really is like water on both sides of the carrier in the zodiac in Jyotish. So yeah, I think Aquarius, the air sign, obviously yes, not a water sign. Aquarius is an air sign. I think that air is generally a very hard triplicity for the moon to exist in. The moon is so about our like instinctual somatic nature that putting it in a sign that is so closely connected with like the brain and the nervous system and the way that the mind is functioning can, I don't want to say blur the lines between those things, but because not that there is a hard and fast line, but definitely links those two elements of like air and water together and forces them to cooperate in a way that is maybe not the easiest for the two of them. I think a lot of my experience with Aquarius also changed with Jyotish and learning about the co-rulership of Rahu with Saturn for Aquarius. At least in my tradition, Rahu is seen as the co-lord of Aquarius. And the story of Vishnu, kind of our like the divine one, he incarnated 9 times and is about to incarnate a 10th time to go, and each time incarnated as one of the nine planets, so the 7 plus Rahu Ketu. And Varaha was the 3rd incarnation, and he is the Rahu incarnation, and he is the one who basically took the earth and rose it from the sea after it was flooded by this like demon. And so I always think about the connotation of Aquarius being like the individualist, the like one who's going to go against the flow, like the rebel, the do-it-yourself one. I think that is so symbolized in this myth of this boar literally taking the earth and like raising it from the sea and being like, let me help you. It is also, I think there's so much of a parallel to the idea of like Atlas, like holding up the sky.
Right.
Uranus, not the ruler of Aquarius. However, I think we liken a lot of tropical Uranus to be connected to this myth of Varaha and Rahu, really. So I think including the nature of Rahu and Aquarius has been something that I have recently started doing and has honestly enhanced my understanding of the sign even more. It is the water carrier, so this idea of being the helper, the servant, the one to assist in the feelings and emotional support of others. I know a lot of other Aquarius moons who we often come to for people that are, when they're in like emotional debates, because we're like the logical, level-headed, see everything from every perspective air sign. So it is like the mediator, the one who's going to keep the feelings in this jar away from them and logically kind of analyze the problem in the situation.
So in that sense, it's more of like the friend that you go to for problem solving rather than perhaps to be comforted.
To vent. Yeah. Yeah. Like I'm someone when people are like, can I vent to you? I'm like, not if you need someone to respond. If you need someone to just like dump, sure. Like I'll sit there and listen, but to offer you any sort of like emotionally supportive advice, I'm so sorry. That's not me.
Yeah. Like your Aquarius moon tropically is like the emotional support I'm going to give you is like problem solving.
I'm
going to help you. I'm going to help you get through this in a practical way. I'm going to help you think through these feelings.
Exactly.
Yeah. Interesting. And I find it interesting that I'm reminded of like Richard Tarnas's work on Prometheus and the association of Prometheus with Uranus as well.
Yes.
And like this idea of Prometheus giving fire to humans. It's like this self-sacrifice, like, and being punished for that. And I feel like that fits in with that theme of service, of
For sure.
like Atlas lifting up the world. And I think it's Ganymede who is the water bearer. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that's correct.
Yeah, Ganymede. Like, I'm not super familiar with that story, but basically, like, being transported to Mount Olympus to carry the water, of the gods. Yeah, it's interesting as my Venus is in Aquarius, and so I'm like, I think a lot about that sign and in relationship to like service and thinking about service, like creating a kind of um, ethos of service.
hmm
Um,
For sure.
yeah, so I feel like that's really interesting.
Do you often, when people find out that your Venus is an Aquarius, do you get the like, are you like, oh, you must be so non-committal?
Um, I don't know if people do that. That has definitely like been a thing in my life,
A
like
trope, yeah.
in high school, especially like when I was younger, especially
Uh-huh.
like my best friend was this woman named Tanya. Shout out to Tanya. Thanks for helping me get through high school. She was just like she would tell me, she'd be like, you have a problem with this, like you have a hard time, you have a hard time committing. And that has changed over time, but it's also like I'm engaged now, so
Right.
not super, which is like I proposed to my fiance. It's not like I am running away from commitment, but it's
Right.
also, I think I've had to think about what I need for commitment to be um, a thing that I'm okay with, like, which can be perhaps like a little offbeat, a little bit different than
Yes.
what the average bear would be willing to commit to, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
I think, yeah, I was going to say when people that are like, into astrology on more than like a surface level would be like, oh, you have an Aquarius moon, you must like be so non-committal. And I'm like, no, I just like have to logically think through every possible situation and every possible outcome of committing to this partnership.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's just it's Saturn. Like it's when there is commitment there and the capacity to commit is there, but it just may take longer than someone with the moon in a Venus sign, for example, which is just generally going to be a more like easily. I don't want anyone to take. I feel like people with Libra and Taurus moons are going to come for me and be like, nah, 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 nah. But
Hey,
like
leave John alone, okay?
Venus is like a warmer energy than Saturn. Like that's just it is what it is.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. I think that most people with strong Saturn in their charts, like I have a Capricorn stellium in my second house, and like
mhm,
Saturn, even though I'm a night chart, Saturn like kind of rules things in my chart. Like,
mhm.
yeah, like if I'm being honest with myself, that's what's up. Like Saturn is not, and I also have Venus in a
In a Saturn sign.
Saturnian sign, and it's
Yeah.
like, yeah, it's not always the warmest thing, but it can be very productive and constructive.
hmm
And it can be its own kind of care, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Acts of service. Hate love languages, but acts of service.
Yeah, they are problematic, but yeah, that can be real. And I think it's interesting too that we're getting a little ahead, but you have Jupiter there in Aquarius as well, and Jupiter has
hmm
some triplicity
hmm
rulership. And
hmm
I know that bisect the moon and Jupiter aren't on the same team, but I think Jupiter is like pretty generous
For sure.
no matter what. And so I'm curious if like that helps a little bit as well.
I think so, especially with that is the next like the applying aspect of my moon is to that conjunction with Jupiter.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I think it does like allow for this warmth that maybe would not be there if there was not another planet there. I think the fact that the moon is the exaltation lord of Jupiter and those two coming together. My moon is in the Pisces Dodecatemoria of
Mm-hmm.
Aquarius, so there is these layers of water beneath this like airy surface.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, I think if it was not for that Jupiter, it would be a very different experience.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Can you tell me a little bit more about what it means to have your moon in that sign of Aquarius, and like to get back into sidereal a little bit, like I know that your moon sign changes to another sign, and how do you look at that difference and kind of find a deeper richness of meaning?
Yeah. So yeah, moon in Aquarius, I think one of the first things that I ever said to my therapist was that I always feel like I'm consistently carrying my feelings around in a jar. And like I only open them or even like reveal them once I really let people in. I think there's some Scorpio qualities that are present there as well. But yeah, this idea of trying to like understand the feelings instead of actually feeling through them is really present with the Aquarius moon. I often link, for some reason, I don't know if there is like mythological or religious imagery connected to this, but the idea of Aquarius and like the eagle always feels really resonant with me. Maybe that's because I have the moon and Jupiter together in Aquarius.
Yeah.
But the idea of always moving and always looking at things from this very high up perspective. This idea of like, let me take in all the information and kind of get a bird's eye view before I like swoop in and actually make like a move. But in the realm of like feelings, not in the unfortunately not in the realm of like Mars and Aquarius. Sure, great. Like, yeah, let me survey the field before I make an attack. But like moon in Aquarius is like, let me find this exact right second to like tell someone that I have been in love with them for years, you know? Like there's that's not maybe the best approach to take at this subject.
Right. And I think too, if it's like, if you don't feel into that, if you're trying to think about what the right moment is, it's like, it's never the right moment.
It's never
there's
moment.
Always a reason why it's not the right moment.
Yes.
Yeah. I feel like that's also, did you have another thought?
No. What's up?
I also feel like perhaps the thinking through it and like the big picture macro view that you desire to take could perhaps be also having to do with the fact that it's in the ninth house in your chart, in your tropical chart. And yeah, I was wondering if you could like do you feel like that's true, or how do those ninth house significations play into how your moon and your Jupiter kind of work together there?
Yeah, totally. I think so I think that so growing up, my earliest memories are that of like reading mythology. Like I was a Percy Jackson kid, and like I was always really into like mythology and witchcraft. Like I watched Hocus Pocus like every day 1 year of my life when I was like 5 or 6 years old. Like that was just always something that was very appealing to me.
Yeah.
And so I think that the moon in the ninth house and the moon having this connotation with almost like comfort, or like what is comforting to us, and that for me being these like fantasy realms and like throwing myself into a universe that was, I thought, different than this one, but a universe that had just like not yet been revealed to me, like it has been now, I guess is how I would describe it. So yeah, I think those ninth house significations were always really present growing up as a kid specifically.
Right, because I feel like astrology can fit into that as well.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
How you kind of make meaning in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a lot of other ninth house. As a band kid growing up, a lot of other people I know that were in marching band with me had moons in the ninth third axis. I later found out in life.
Oh, interesting.
Which was really interesting. Yeah.
How do you feel like community? I know that that's such a loaded word, but how do you feel like community comes in with your Saturn in the 11th ruling your moon?
So I think that for me has shown up in like, if we, with at least now in life as a 20 something and not as before when this would have been a different answer 10 years ago.
Yeah.
But like now as the age I am, I now notice that if someone and I do not share the same like core set of like values and like respects for others, and yeah, just like the things that we do our value at our core are not aligned or do not mesh, then like we cannot be friends. Like,
yeah,
I don't even care if you want to see each other once a year for like 10 minutes. Like I don't have the capacity for that. I'm so sorry.
Mm.
And I also think that the Saturn in the 11th fallen ruling the moon manifests, and I am someone who needs, like, thrives on social interaction, but likes to be the least noticed person at the function.
I can
So
relate.
so I will, like, I love to go to like a big house party, but then sit at a table in like the kitchen with like three of my other friends while 27 other people are hanging out in the living room, you know?
Mm.
Um, so yeah, I think that also manifests that way.
That's so cool. That's really interesting. Yeah. Is it almost like other people seeing that the close relationships that you have, or what do you think it is about
Um,
like being with people you're close with around other people that you're perhaps
I
just acquainted with?
I think it's the, like, almost just like the people watching and the observing of the social interaction, and like
Okay.
being, like, feeling, almost like feeling present in that interaction without having to put in the effort to like interact.
Yeah. That's so interesting.
Yeah.
Cool. I'm really like, I don't know, I'm really curious about that too, because I feel like I can also relate kind of being a bit of an interest this kind of like introvert, but I also like really like people watching, and I like sometimes being around the energy of people. Like when I was in college, I like couldn't work in the library. I would work at like my campus's Starbucks
Yeah.
and like put my headphones in and just like watch people walk by, and there was
Yeah.
something about the movement around me that felt really like stimulating.
Yep.
Or
Agreed.
yeah, that's so interesting. Cool. And then, so when we look at your sidereal chart, your moon moves into Capricorn,
Moves into Capricorn.
and moves into the eighth house. And
Mm-hmm.
so, I want to give a shout out to I think her name is Adira, who used to
Yes.
be or I think may still be Astrology for Bros, who's
Yeah.
also a student of Jyotish. And we were talking about Julia Fox's chart one day on
Oh my God.
Twitter. And it reminded me of the Mars episode that she did for the astrology podcast, because she talked about her seventh house, Capricorn Mars, and about this idea of Marana Karaka Sathana.
Yeah. Marna
Correct me.
Karkastana. Yeah.
Yeah, which MKS. And it's this
MKS.
kind of idea that I understand it as this idea of kind of like you have places in the chart where planets rejoice, where they have joy. So Venus in the fifth and the moon in the third. And then I think of MKS as kind of like anti-joy, like where planets
Anti-joy. Yeah.
really
That's how I
don't
describe
want to
it
be.
to. Yeah. That's how I describe it to Hellenistic astrologers, is that it's basically anti-joy. Like, this
Okay,
is a place
cool.
of pain for the planet. Um,
Mm,
Marna has the word has to do with death. Karaka is like significator, and Sthana is place. So it is like
mm,
the place that signifies the death of the planet is kind of
mm.
like the translation.
Okay.
Yes, and the moons is the eighth. I am not a natural zodiac believer. I do not think Aries is the first house.
Okay.
However, I do believe that there are some significations that you can draw with the sign and the natural house. I think there is some overlap.
Okay.
But your Mars does not rule your first house unless you are an Aries or Scorpio rising.
Mm-hmm.
That. And I do think a lot about the moon's fallen placement in Scorpio, and the MKS placement of the moon being the eighth, sort of like a natural reflection of that.
Mm.
Venus is the sixth, and she does fall in Virgo. They're not all set up that way,
Yeah.
but that is one way to think about it. And the eighth is this place of death and darkness, and has lots of really like gnarly significations, even in, like, they're the same in both
Mm-hmm.
traditions, and it's just not a place that you want this emotion centered planet to like linger.
Mm.
I think about Venus's in the sixth and being like, yeah, I love my mother, who has Venus and Sagittarius in the sixth tropically.
Mm.
Like, she just loves like so freely and so beautifully, but you're only able to see it come out in like certain circumstances. Like, she is the best manager. Like, I wish that I could work for her, because she is like
Mm.
so nice to the people that she works for, and like takes them on trips. She's booking like 3 hours of my time for them to get their charts read by me. Like, she just like cares
That's
about
awesome.
those people so much. But like, think about that Sag Venus if it was in the 10th. or like if it was in the first. Like it's just not a place where that planet optimizes what it wants to do.
Right. Right. Interesting. And yeah, I mean, given the fact that the eighth is like a, a dark house, quote
A
unquote,
dark
and
house,
and,
yeah.
and it is like has these difficult connotations or significations, and I'm interested to hear, however much you're comfortable sharing,
Mm-hmm.
how that manifests for you with the moon there, sidereally.
Yeah. So I think a big thing, I know other like MKS moons, and it is so easy to tell when we are in a bad mood.
Mm.
And it is, to me, it's almost like embarrassing and like exacerbates the bad mood. Like nothing frustrates me more when I'm at work than when my like seven of my coworkers in a row are like, "Are you okay?" Like clearly I'm not. Can we just like not address it? Like let me work the rest of my 3 hours and like let me leave. Like I really don't want to talk about it with you people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So yes, I think this idea of, the moon waxes and wanes. There's advantages for when your emotions shine bright. There's advantages when they are a little hidden. And it's hard for us on both spectrums to show like extreme feelings, I feel, on either side.
Yeah.
Um, I do think I think it is kind of like an easier understanding from Aquarius to Capricorn because they do share the same ruler. So this
Mm-hmm.
idea of the Saturn influence is similar. Um, but yeah, the house placement moving from the ninth to the eighth. I definitely think that I'm someone who people, I think it's an eighth house moon thing for people to see you as like a natural therapist almost. And
Mm-hmm.
even though like my moon is in tropical Aquarius, I don't want to really give you emotional advice, but that doesn't stop people from like flocking to me when they are in distress or in like emotional turmoil. I think that's also a very eighth house moon thing.
I could just picture people being like, John, tell me what to do.
Yeah, and I'm like, stop fucking crying and do something. Like
Uh-huh.
that's just not helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if it's because I have the moon in Sag in my first and my moon rules my eighth, but I really relate to that idea of like, I'm feeling what I'm feeling. Everybody knows it.
Everybody knows, yeah.
I do not want, I don't always want to talk about it, Like it's not always fun or pleasant. And
Mm-hmm.
please just leave me alone about it. I
if I
can't
if I want to
mask.
talk to you about it, I will talk to you about it. But other than that,
Yeah. And it's like I feel like I could understand people being like, why don't you just mask a little bit if you don't want to talk about it? And I'm just
yeah.
like, I can't though. I'm so sorry.
I wish that was a possible. Genuinely, I wish I could.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's so interesting. And I also want to say, because I know some people, I'm not gonna like share their name because it's like their moon is in their eighth house, but I know someone in the astrological community who's spoken about really liking their moon in their eighth house
Mhm.
because they feel like it helps them um, access an intuition or access a I don't know, some kind of like emotional sense that they might not have otherwise in terms of like their interactions with other people. And so
Mhm.
I'm not saying that this is a universal experience.
Yeah. Well,
So
so I think what I want to add to that, or like respond to that, and saying like
mhm,
in Jyotish, the moon in the eighth is like almost like in most texts, it's like doomed. Like this native will experience lots of trauma. This native will blah blah blah. And so I think that when you have the moon in a dark house, 6, 8, 12, I don't want to include two in that. The moon in 6, 8, and 12, like I think you can be predisposed to some pretty harsh experiences growing up. Like I know I
mhm,
was, and I know other people with both
mm,
sixth moons that also were. And I think that those harsh experiences force people to become more emotionally intelligent at a
yeah,
younger age.
yeah,
And so I don't want to discount this person's experience of that eighth house moon, feeling like they are more spiritually connected or emotionally, whatever the phrase was that you used.
mhm,
Um, but my first instinct is to say, well, is that because you experienced lots of adversity that forced you kind of in this direction?
yeah. I definitely appreciate that, and it reminds me of recently taking. I watched one of Cameron Cassidy's lectures that he did.
Mm-hmm.
He did like a live class, but it was also on Zoom, and he talks about this idea of accidental malefics and
Mm-hmm.
the rulers of the 12th, 8th, 6th as accidental malefics. And like I had a hard time with that
Mm-hmm.
because my moon rules my eighth, and I do feel like, in my spiritual life, my relationship with the moon is so generative. And I generally look at the moon as like a benefic, positive aspect in my life. But if I'm being real, there have been difficult eighth house associations, in my life. And so, like, I feel like I have to just be objective about that. And I think that does kind of speak to this idea of, I think people want malefics to be malefic and want benefics to be benefic. And like the unfortunate reality of life is that it's very complex and
they all have mixed significance.
Yeah, nothing is like one thing or the other.
Yeah. We have this in Jyotish, we have this idea of Yogacaraka planets, which are planets that lord both a trine and an angle, and they're basically functionally benefics. So for like Cancer rising, Mars rules 4 and 9. So that both of those houses have very positive signification. So for Cancer rising people, Mars is like functionally benefic in your chart. Just like for me as a Gemini rising, in Jyotish, it's viewed that when planets rule the angles, you like switch them. So for mutable risings, Mercury and Jupiter become malefic because they almost crumble under the pressure of the fourth of the angle significations. It's like too much for their benefic nature to handle. Whereas a planet like Mars ruling the 10th or Saturn ruling the 10th is going to yield better results because that is a more harsher planet that will get things done in a 10th house work space, for example.
Right.
So I think that, that idea of like functionally benefic or functionally the planet's inherent nature mixed with their functional nature is something that really needs to be examined more.
Right. Yeah, and I think that the thing that I really appreciate about Jyotish that I'm seeing is that which this isn't absent in Hellenistic astrology or just discussions of like the tropical zodiac, but I think that from what I've experienced of Jyotish, like there are real remedies that people can do for things where it's not necessarily like work with the energy of the planet in this way. It's like, no, do this specific chant for this many days, for this much time a day. Like, and there's something that feels very comforting about that, to be like, okay, like there is a difficult thing, but there is a
clear solution.
Right.
A clear way to assist the planet as opposed to like setting it. Don't get me wrong, an Orphic hymn will get you far. Yeah. But like to chant 108 times a mantra every single day for like a month for my moon in the 8th, like did wonders for my mental health.
And to just be like, this is the tradition that we have and we know that this works. Rather than like, maybe if you read this story, it could help you. Like, and I've had really beneficial experiences with those kinds of like, for sure. I don't know if you can call them remediations, but I think that there's something really valuable about like, we have this tradition of solutions to particular manifestations, significations in the chart.
Totally.
Yeah, let's talk about the relationship of your moon and your sun. I know that in Hellenistic astrology, lunar phase, and I think modern as well, like lunar phase plays a pretty important role. And I was just curious if, you could tell me about the relationship of your moon and your sun, and if there's any important distinctions between Hellenistic and Jyotish.
Yeah. So my sun and moon are square by sign in both zodiacs. I was born right around like a day before the exact first quarter moon. So we use our, like, I'm familiar in Hellenistic, I'm sure you are too, with like the 8 lunar phases. In Jyotish, they're part of their calendar or their panchanga, which is the 5 limbs of time. One of those limbs is the Tithi, which is the moon phase. However, there's 30 of them. So you take the moon's distance from the sun in increments of 12 degrees. So for the first, if the sun is at 0 Aries, from the moon at 0 Aries to 12 Aries, you're in the first Tithi. From 12 Aries to 24 Aries, you're in the second, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. And each of these Tithi are given a planetary lord. And the Tithi is the water element of the calendar, just like the nakshatra is part of this calendar, and that is the air element. So it's like the mental, the prana, the way the air is moving through the body. The Tithi is the way that the water is moving through the body. So it's like the Tithi Lord shows things connected to our relationships and our like relational nature. Funnily enough, mine is Saturn. I was born on the 7th waxing Tithi, which is Saturn. So not only does my moon fall in the sign of Saturn, Saturn is also the one that is governing the flow of like water and relational kind of propensity in my life, in my body. And yeah, one of the first things that you look at when you delineate a Jyotish chart is this Panchanga, because serious afflictions to any of these limbs can cause serious health, mental health, relational health issues. Like the day lord, for example, I was born on a Thursday. Jupiter is my day lord. The day lord is the Agni, the fire, the like digestive physical health of the body, and I have Jupiter debilitated in Capricorn.
Okay.
And I have like serious gastrointestinal issues. I also have a really struggle with gaining weight. So despite Jupiter being this planet of like abundance, ruling what my physical constitution is supposed to be like, it is fallen, it is struggling. So for me to like physically gain weight has like my entire life been a huge issue. And so yes, limbs of this calendar work this way. And so the lunar phase, the Tithi, is included in that calendar.
Interesting. Thank you for sharing that. I realized that we explained what nakshatras were, but then we skipped over your particular nakshatra. Is there anything that you want to add about that to kind of like continue this talk about your experience of your moon, how that manifests in your body?
So yeah, then I love the nakshatra. I think that people overuse the nakshatra on the internet. But I do love the nakshatra. I think that it because it is about like the air and the way that things are viewed and like thought about, it does give insights to the planet's positions in relative to like how they are thinking. I also my hot take, I don't know if it's that hot of a take, is that most of these modern astrology psychology delineations of the planets are actually rooted in the nakshatra.
Okay.
For example, I know Aquarius often gets the like, you are like, you always think that you're right. You're very logical. You are good in a crisis situation. You tend to be very ethical, and you tend to like be much of a loner. Those qualities are all embedded in my nakshatra, Uttarashada, which is the nakshatra. You look at the deity that is said to reside in the nakshatra for the description, not really the planetary lord. So the deity or deities that reside in Uttarashada are the Vishvadeva, which are like the 10 universal deities. And it's like truth, justice. They have like, those are their names. They're like qualities that make you an ethical person, basically, are found in these 10 universal deities.
Okay.
And I think that very much lends itself to people thinking that Aquarius is this very ethical, like, you're always right. You have to think through everything. And it's like, yes, I'm thinking through everything, but I'm trying to include every side of these 10 deities. And then the loner aspect coming from with the nakshatra, each is assigned like an animal, basically, that's supposed to show like fertility and sexual compatibility. And there's a male and a female of each animal. And so you're said, if you are the male tiger, one of your best matches is the female tiger, for example. However, because there's 27, one nakshatra's got to be left out of this pair, and that one is Uttarashada. It's given the mongoose. It's the only like neutral yoni or like animal compatibility. So this idea of like being a loner in Aquarius, but that's Uttarashada. Like it's a nakshatra that is concerned with ethics and justice and making sure things are right. So it doesn't really have the time to be concerned with like relationships and connecting to people on like a more intimate level.
Interesting.
Yeah. And currently, oh no, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I find myself, because my Venus is kind of near your moon, I find myself being like, ooh, what is there other planets I can apply to the nakshatra, or is it just the moon? And I know that we've talked a little bit off air about the ascendant and the nakshatra of the ascendant, but is this thing that's just kind of like only used for those two places?
I would say that the most important bar none is the moon. And I guess technically in a technical application way, that is really the only one that you're going to use.
Mm-hmm.
But it is interesting to think about the nakshatra being a like psychological zodiac because it is the zodiac of the moon, whereas the 12 signs are the zodiac of the sun.
Mm-hmm.
So I will, when I'm doing a reading, look at somebody like the nakshatra of the ascendant, being like, what is the way in which your brain kind of like looks and consumes the world?
Right.
For the nakshatra of Venus, like, what is the way in which you are filtering love and relations? Like, through what pair of glasses is this planet putting on to kind of filter the information it's receiving?
Yeah.
Is like a very broad way that I look at all of them.
Mm-hmm.
And I tell people the ones that are like important for them are the ones of their moon and ascendant, like for sure. But if you have two or more planets in the same nakshatra, those nakshatra themes are going to be present in your life. And like looking at the deity that rules that nakshatra and being like, how is this a theme that is constantly coming up in my life?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's really interesting to think about just the history of astrology and how these ideas may have kind of cross-pollinated in different geographies.
For sure.
Because I'm reminded, what are the degrees of that nakshatra?
Sidereally, it is 2640 Sag to 10 Capricorn.
Okay, never mind. Because I'm thinking about the first decan of Aquarius and its connotation of like exile. So,
well, there is yeah, but like if you overlap that to like a tropical or where it is right now in the tropical zodiac, the Einam shows like 24-ish degrees right now, so it's like almost like the first decan of Aquarius. Actually, that would be this nakshatra right now.
But I think when the decans were probably getting their meaning, though, it was like
the overlap was yeah. I think a lot about like the kind of like surgeons of like evolutionary astrology and like the late 1900s, and that a lot being kind of just corrupted Jyotish, but that's a discussion for a different day.
Okay, and so are there any other aspects in your chart in relation to your moon that you think would be good to discuss?
Let me think.
Because I think we touched on Jupiter.
I think the moon Jupiter is the loudest one for sure.
I think that you mentioned something about like a story associated with your moon conjunct Uranus.
Conjunct Uranus. Oh yeah. This is just hysterical. When I started learning astrology, I was so modern. Like for the first like 3 months of my astrological study, I was very steeped in modern astrology. And so my moon is applying to Uranus by like a little over a degree. That's if we're including outer planets, the next aspect my moon would make would be this conjunction to Uranus. So the like Uranian archetype, which now I associate as the like Rahuvian archetype now later in my studies, I've always associated with. And I was very into like dispositor trees when I first started. I don't know why that was like my first like thing.
I mean, it's a big thing in modern, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I was like doing all my dispositor trees for my chart and like my family charts and stuff, and I realized that my sole dispositor was Uranus in Aquarius. And I I like would die on that hill for like months. Like, my sole dispositor is Uranus.
And you felt very like special.
Yeah, I was like, oh my god, not everyone. This was also when I was using equal house because I was like, I want to have an 8th house moon because it's just different. Like, it makes me so me. Yeah, I was like, don't let 19-year-olds learn astrology, but make sure you've gone to therapy before you start learning astrology, please, kids. So yeah, it's just like really funny about my astrological journey now, where I was then to where I am now.
I feel like there's a whole conversation in that one sentence of like, please learn therapy before you. Anyway, we'll let that go. I will not get sidetracked.
I will, yeah.
So yeah, what role does the moon play in relation to your spiritual practice, and what suggestions would you have for someone who's new to astrology or planetary relationship in building their relationship with the moon?
Yeah, for anyone that is looking to even connect to like the magical, more spiritual side of astrology, literally go outside and look at the moon every night. Go
Mm-hmm.
look at the planets rise, go look at them set, but particularly look at the moon. Most days you can see her. Like, unless we are in the tithies surrounding the new moon, like she's, even during the daytime, she's generally pretty visible. Tracking the lunar cycle, tracking how your kind of the ebb and flow of your feelings go with the lunar cycle was something that I did for like the first few months of seriously studying Hellenistic astrology, and I was like, oh shit, like this is like
What'd
this
you
is real.
find?
Just like when the moon was reaching its fuller, like more brightness, I was feeling brighter, I was feeling more energized and ready to do things, whereas like days like today, where I'm pretty sure the new moon is tomorrow.
Mm.
Yeah, we are on the 14th day of the waxing. We're in K14 right now.
Mm.
Yeah, I'm feeling really like low energy. Like my friends want to go out tonight. Probably not going to do that.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like simple things like that. And people always joke about like the crazies coming out on the full moon.
Right.
But like as someone who works in customer service,
Yeah, I bet you
full
see it.
moons are, oh, you see it. Full moons and the like very, very balsamic moon. We Jyotish calls it Amavasya, but it's
Mm-hmm.
the last 12 degrees before the moon conjoins the sun.
Okay.
The dark moon, very like so low energy. It's always the day that nobody wants to work, and like there's so
Mm.
many issues, and just like noticing those aspects of the lunar cycle and how they are just affecting like the energy
Right.
around you is like so helpful, I think.
Yeah. I love that too of like I feel like we talked about this on the last episode, but the moon representing people, and if people at times when if people didn't know their birth time, they could just like kind of do electional astrology by knowing where the moon was and having a relationship with it, and like
Mm-hmm.
don't sow your seeds when the moon is waning, or like
Mm-hmm.
in Scorpio.
The Via Combusta, yeah.
Right, the Via Combusta. I still don't know what to make of the Via Combusta, especially like when I do horary and I'm like, okay, it's at 16 Libra. It seems fine.
It's
I don't know.
it's a 16 Libra, but Venus is at 17. So like, is it really that?
Yeah. Not good if you're looking for an application to Saturn, but if you're looking for an application to Venus, it's great.
It's great. Why not?
Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah. So any other advice you have?
Um, Advice? I don't know. I mean, my general advice for people is to like check your sources and like don't take everything on Twitter as like a fact.
Yeah.
Please.
Mm, mm.
Think critic. As we said on the Aquarius season forecast, be fucking for real and think critically, and it will get you so far.
I love that. That feels very apropos. An Aquarius moon.
Aquarius moon.
Okay, so John, where can we find you, and is there anything that you are working on that you would like to share with us?
Yeah. So yeah, my website is astrolojohn.com. I'm still working on my page that details my approach to Jyotish and those things, but that should be up soon. You can still book Jyotish or Western natal readings, elections with me, astrolojohn.com. My Twitter is astrolojohn. I'm on a podcast. I'm on a great podcast with Deja and Jared. It's called Triplicity. Tea as in like sipping the tea. We do
More like spilling the tea.
We've gotten, I think, just progressively more unhinged as the episodes have aired. So
it's so much fun.
We have a Mercury Mars conjunction in the 10th of the podcast inception chart, so we're just kind of waiting for something to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And we're hosting we hosted an event a few months ago called the Weed Circle, where people talked for like 5 minutes about their astrology takes, whether they were hot or informative. It was super fun. We're having another one of those on February 4th. Starts at 1:41 p.m. Eastern time. We're looking for people to come chat. So if you have something you want to talk about, DM us on Twitter at TripLicityPod, and we'll see if we can fit you in the lineup. Come hang, get high, don't get high, do whatever you want to do. Come make Astro community and talk about. I'll be talking about the charts of characters from Avatar: The Last Airbender.
Oh, cool.
That I have hypothesized.
Wonderful.
It's going to be my topic. So.
Okay, I'll be sure to link all that stuff in the show notes. And the last thing I wanted to say, which I think is really funny, the Weed Circle reminded me of, is when I heard about the Weed Circle at NORWAC 2022 saved my life, and I made that like t-shirt design and sent to you guys. I don't even smoke. I wasn't part of the Weed Circle.
That's what I was gonna say. Like, I feel like that's where I would have remembered you, and I don't.
Yeah, I've been sober for like since I was 18, so I haven't smoked weed in like over like 15. It's been about 15 years.
Wow.
But I just couldn't resist like a good t-shirt design.
A good t-shirt design. Yeah, if it's good, it's good.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyway, thank you so much, John, for being here. Really, really appreciate it. And
thank you.
I'll talk to you soon.
Yes, it was so nice chatting.
To support the show by donating or becoming a member, please visit my website, which is linked in the show notes. And please subscribe to the show wherever you listen. You can also find me on Instagram and Twitter. See those links in the show notes as well. If you have any questions or feedback on the show, please feel free to contact me via my website or email me at sphallhorary@gmail.com. In the show notes, you can also find links to astrologers and resources that we touched on in this episode. Thanks. See you next time.